This is a nice report put together by the government of India with the help of GFDRR, which is the Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery, which itself is run by the World Bank. It talks about building resilient and prosperous cities in India. Basically, Indian cities are heavily stressed by climate change, population growth, old infrastructure, drainage systems, solid waste management problems, and so on. And the report is very nice and long, over 130 pages, looks at all the ways in which the climate change is affecting Indian cities. Sea level rise, heat waves, extreme rainfall, urban flooding, pluvial floods, etc. And of course, the infrastructure demand on housing and infrastructure and urban services also computes costs up to 2070 or so based on various scenarios from the IPCC, the Shared Socioeconomic Pathways. Computes the cost estimates and talks about how to raise finance, public-private and public-private partnerships, and also cost-benefit analysis and the co-benefits that come with the investment in retrofitting and building newer infrastructure, housing, urban services, and of course also provides some ways forward, recommendations on how to get this done. So I'm going to be very brief and try to capture the most important points. So the report makes here the case for increased and urgent investment in climate resilient cities in India, which we call weather ready and climate resilient. So urban population is expected to double, as we will see, and the interventions are needed now and for not only making them flourish as economic hubs and contributing to a country's economic growth and social development as well, and provide livelihoods to population that's expected to keep growing. Climate change is already here happening, rainfall patterns and intensity. I'm sitting in Mumbai as I'm recording this, and this monsoon has seen some really heavy flooding in the city, even though we are trying to provide early warnings, and our forecasts have been helpful to the government according to government's own statements. So flooding still happens, so we still have ways to go into converting early warnings into mitigating floods, let alone eliminating waterlogging and so on. So if nothing happens, it's projected that heat-related deaths in Indian cities will double by 2050. So look at some of these numbers. Indian cities will be unable to reach their full potential if they stay on their current development strategy. They are highly vulnerable to climate impacts because of the heavy concentration of people and assets, and they have limited capacity to manage these impacts as well. So they obviously, city centers face higher, disproportionately high impacts in terms of climate change related events, hazards, and this is true for all cities and also true for Indian cities, of course. And flooding can cause road closure, disruption of traffic flow, electricity losses, and lead to damage and economic losses as well, and of course health issues that can follow after that with waterborne and vector-borne diseases. As a tropical country, it gets all these issues to deal with anyways during the monsoon. Better managed and resilient urban development has the potential to further improve access to urban amenities such as parks and recreational areas. So co-benefits are many, and the report is basically an analytical work conducted between September 2022 and May 2025, and is supported by the World Bank Group and the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, including its City Resilience Program. So looking at some numbers, India has huge opportunity to drive resilient urban development. Population is going to double, so it's stood at 480 million in 2020, expected to jump to 951 million by 2050, and maybe 1.1 billion by 2070. But population projections are always uncertain because already India has hit the fertility rate that is below replacement. Like China, it will hit peak population at some point, so we have to be careful about the numbers. Nonetheless, we need to plan for growing population centers in urban uh, localities. Massive new infrastructure will be needed to house new urban population. So between 2022 and 2070, more than 144 million urban dwelling units will be needed in India, more than doubling the existing housing stock. So here it's going in 2022 from around 50 million to about 150 million by 2070. And obviously in cities like Mumbai, you get very expensive urban development happening, very expensive housing in some centers, but informal housing is trying to be replaced with reasonable housing under some plans. In 2020, cities hosted over 1/3 of the national population, around 480 as we said, and Indian cities are projected to produce 285 million tons of solid waste. Solid waste management is always an issue. Estimated at 55 million tons in 2020, it's projected to reach 415 million tons of solid waste by 2050, and cities will play even bigger role in driving economic growth. So by 2030, 70% of the new employment is going to be in the cities. Total investment needs for new, resilient and green urban infrastructure and services are estimated at 2.4 trillion by 2050 and 10.3 trillion by 2070. So obviously projections are always uncertain, but one needs to plan for those anyways. Right? This is the post-normal science, we call it. Uncertainty in the risk information and values. Risks are not clearly understood, but decisions have to be made anyways. The greatest climate risks to Indian cities, of course, flooding and extreme heat. And you have, you can start here, for example, city expansion into unsafe areas keeps happening. Urban heat island obviously is what comes with urbanizing and all the infrastructure and paving and the loss of green cover. So green cover loss here. Urban flooding is very common now, and cascading infrastructure failures are quite common as well, especially for the strained old infrastructure from the historic cities like Kolkata and Mumbai, Chennai, Bengaluru, etc. Urgent and proactive actions needed to strengthen urban resilience. There is a lot of discussion on that that I'm going to skip, but you can look it up. Opportunities for more efficient urban services and better quality of urban life exist. There are ways to exploit those opportunities and create urban services and quality of life much better than what exists. Many details given as well. Priority adaptation and low carbon solutions for Indian cities include things like urban flood, based on steps, urban flood management, early warning systems, nature-based solutions, school roofs and tree cover, heat action plans, many exist already, inclusive shelters. So heat shelters, hydration centers, etc. will be needed, and they have to be inclusive and not just protect the rich, for example. And the report discusses each of these adaptation solutions in great detail that you can follow up on. I'm going to skip the details here. That combines with low carbon solutions, so improved water management, improved waste management, electrification of mobility, so EVs, of especially buses and public transportation, trains, etc. Compact city, renewable energy and energy efficient buildings themselves. Significant financing and capacity building support required to drive resilient urban development. The headlines capture quite a bit, but many details are provided in the report that you can follow up with. Significant financing is needed, as we said, to drive resilient urban development. So estimated from 2018 at percentage of GDP, only 0.7%, but by 2070 it could be as high as 2.5% if the cities grow as projected by 2050, which is a good time horizon to focus on, it will be at 1.7%. This is good to remember as a percentage, because as GDP keeps growing and India will hopefully continue to grow economically, 1.7% will, if you look at 10.3 trillion, that might sound like a lot, but 1.7% of the GDP is a good number, and the co-benefits that come with it and the employment and innovation that happen in urban centers make it totally worth the expenditure, right? So what is the next step? The national government can develop a dedicated national urban resilience program along with a financing strategy based on the recommendations of this report. Urban resilience program priorities are identified in chapter 5, which we'll look at, and can be in the form of a new urban mission, building on lessons from earlier missions and developed with key counterparts. So India has several missions like the solar energy mission and so on, that we will look at the key missions and the recommendations. Okay. Supporting recommendations on improving multi-sectoral integrated planning for resilient infrastructure standards, guidance and implementation, as well as measures to increase institutional capacity may also be considered. Okay, again being brief there. What does it provide here? Achieving resilient and prosperous cities. Key recommendations are split into city interventions and national and state interventions. So each city is within a state or a union territory sometimes, but there are national and state interventions that help manage cities or make them more resilient and prosperous. 10-point city climate action plan, we'll visit this again at the end. Assessment, risk and plan for climate action. Invest in disaster resilience and climate adaptation, which is very, very important to keep them functioning economically and otherwise. Invest in resilient and green development. City finance, of course, collaboration and coordination, so multi-sectoral planning for heat and flood and other climate and disaster shocks and compound events. So you could have flood and heat wave occurring together and diseases breaking out at the same time. Institutional capacity, of course, urban planning and resilience, project preparation, implementation and monitoring results, finance, budgeting, private sector engagement, citizens, NGOs, etc. At the national and state levels, you need interventions on flood and extreme heat resilience, resilient and efficient urban development, financing and implementation strategies. Altogether gives you improved quality of life, and when you combine with the potential benefits as part of the cost benefit analysis, then you are going to end up with improved urban safety, resilient and green urban development services, resilient and green buildings, and vibrant urban economies, which will directly contribute to national GDPs. Cities like Mumbai are the financial center, Bangalore is the IT sector, and so on. Okay. Looking at some numbers from the chapters beyond the executive summary. Urban population, as we said, the numbers are there, but as I said, they tend to be very uncertain. But if you look at typical cities like Chennai, Delhi, Surat, Thiruvananthapuram and Indore, some are still at relatively low populations, but here Delhi is a massive city center, expanding and expanding forever, and is expected to hit about 35 million by 2070 from the 2022 number of about 20 million. Mumbai is not included here, but that's also around 22 million now, and some estimates say it will hit 40 million by 2050, but again, uncertainties because India has hit below replacement rate fertility. But anyway, settlements exposure to flood hazard types percentage. So as you go from 1985, has been increasing into 2020 for the so these are the cities. Sorry, here. Low, moderate, high and very high exposure. So settlement exposure to pluvial flood hazards growth rate. settlement exposure to coastal flood hazards growth rate in percentages, settlement exposure to fluvial flood hazards. Sorry, fluvial. So there is a Miti River, several rivers run through cities often, and so pluvial, you know what is pluvial flood? It's basically water logging when drainage capacity is not sufficient, and fluvial is when you have rivers overflowing their boundaries and inundating cities. Built up area in selected cities exposed to pluvial flood hazard in square kilometers, so going to several hundred square kilometers here. This is Mumbai here, and this is Delhi here. Delhi has flooded many times, and it's really the nation's capital, but the governance is complicated. It's a state, and there is a state government, but the central government, the parliament, are located within the state. So there are many issues to deal with when it comes to governance and so on. So some figures: predominant future pluvial flood challenge faced by urban areas in 2070 under SSP 2 and RSP 4.5. Shared socioeconomic pathway 2. I have discussed these elsewhere. RCP, representative concentration pathway 4.5, is where the additional radiative forcing by 2100 will be 4.5 watts per meter squared. So these are scales here given in terms of future urban flood challenge being, urbanization is high, climate change impacts are low, climate change impacts increase, urbanization increase, you with these end up with these red spots, and these are the number of people exposed in circles, so millions of people from 1 to 50. So it's very schematic, but Mumbai sits here, and Bengaluru and Chennai are here. Delhi is somewhere out there here. This is Delhi, and this is Kolkata, and so on. Okay, so just gives you a broad sense of what we are expecting under these future scenarios by 2070. Again, uncertainties are there, but we need to plan anyway. Settlement areas in selected cities exposed to median projected sea level rise in square kilometers. So a lot of flooding combines with high tides, and high tides and sea level rise are a bad combination. So Mumbai has the high settlement area exposed to sea level rise, Kolkata next, Chennai, Surat, obviously Agartala, Guwahati and Puri are interior, so the dark greenish color here is by 2050, by 2100. So uncertainties beyond 2050 are honestly all dominated by the scenario assumptions in SSP and RCP, so we can always remember that and see what can be done given the uncertainties, right? Built up area in selected cities exposed to fluvial risk 1985 to 2015. So this is the past, so this is what really happened. So Delhi over 600 square kilometers, up to 600 square kilometers by 2015, probably has continued to increase by now. Kolkata, Mumbai and Chennai, basically all of them have increased built up area which is exposed to fluvial flood hazard over this period of 1985 to 2015. Built up area exposed to fluvial flood hazard in other cities. So you can see the various cities here: Patna, Imphal. Excuse me, I'm getting a phone call. Let me pause here for a second and see if it's a spam. Okay, so it's the movers, and that's important, but I can call him later. Okay, so to continue the discussion on making the cities resilient, we talked about built up areas with exposure to fluvial hazards, and here heat exposure to for 10 largest cities in billion person hours per year at 30 degrees C wet bulb global temperature. Global wet bulb global temperature includes shade and direct sun exposure as opposed to just the wet bulb temperature. If you don't know, I have discussed it elsewhere. So it could be 30 degrees C wet bulb global temperature or hotter. So 1983 to 1990 for various cities, and 2010 to 2016. So what has already happened? Hyderabad, went up, but not much still. This is in terms of billion person hours per year at 30 degrees C exposure, heat exposure. Okay, so Surat higher, Lucknow, Varanasi, and then you get into Ahmedabad, which has a very nice heat action plan, which is discussed in the report, but I'm not going to present it here. Chennai, very hot place, and its exposure is going up. Mumbai, very hot and humid as well. New Delhi, hot as hell, really, really hot, and Kolkata, of course, quite hot, and you can see it has the largest heat exposure in India in terms of cities for billion person hours per year. Obviously, nothing surprising there. With climate change, this is expected to get worse. So India is in the annual trend. It looks like it's not warming or even cooling, but heat waves and heat exposure still happen even if the mean temperature is going up. So extreme events, and for example, mean rainfall may be going down, but extreme rainfall can still go up, and it does, right? Over many Indian cities and overall in India. Priority urban pluvial flood strategies, then you can look at urban flood resilience priorities. I won't look at, again, you have looking at Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, and Bangalore and Chennai here. This must be, what is this city here? This is Maharashtra. Let me leave it. Hyderabad. Okay. So strengthen flood preparedness and retrofitting of protection systems, improve flood preparedness and nature-based solutions. I have discussed nature-based solutions elsewhere. You can look up. Improve flood risk-sensitive planning, preparedness and protection. Strengthen urban infrastructure, including drainage and mix of strategies with millions of people corresponding to the city size in the circle size. So Hyderabad versus Mumbai and Delhi and Kolkata and so on. So you can see that it's a fairly detailed granular map in terms of the various strategies or mixed strategies needed. So you have to be very location specific, pluvial, fluvial, and whether it's also affected by sea level rise and so on. Net benefits of adaptation and residual risk. So I will just show this. These are SSP 1, RCP 2.6, the most benign scenario in terms of trying to stay under 1.5 degrees C. Then you have other scenarios which get worse and worse. SSP 5, RCP 8.5 is basically business as usual, where we don't do anything. And you can also think of these as adaptation challenges versus mitigation challenges. So adaptation challenges may become greater and greater. Mitigation challenges may become greater and greater depending on which scenario you are following. But these are obviously always tricky, because if Putin tries to do something and other there are all kinds of conflicts going on all the time. So future protection standard per year by year, so present, 2050 and 2070. In each case you can see residual risk in billions of US dollars per year. Lower here, much higher here, and as you can see they all drop as you go. This is present, 2050, 2070. What we are looking at is future protection standard year. So these are essentially estimates that come with net benefits of adaptation, and then even if you do all the adaptation, you're going to have some residual risk, because risk is never zero, right? So essentially the more adaptation you do, the less the residual risk, but adaptation cost is high. So how do you account for the benefits? Net risk benefit in billions of US dollars here, again for the various scenarios, and 30-year plan and 50-year plan. So you can see that you can plan for the next 30 years from the baseline year, or the next 50 years, and people who do not want to spend money can crank up the discount rate and say it's not worth investing so much because the benefits will depreciate very fast. But that's not the point of investing in resilience, because as climate change continues to get worse, and even if we reach net zero, the warming will continue for some time. So extreme events and heat waves, flooding, etc., will continue for a while. So you cannot really rely too much on discount rates, right? City heat mitigation actions, intervention packages, and impact evaluation approaches. So you have medium ambition package and high ambition package, and impacts are quantified in terms of averted mortality, averted labor productivity loss, and so on. The category of intervention then, urban greening, heat waves, early warnings. This is happening more and more, and India has invested very heavily in improving early warnings and delivering them at scale. Working hours shift and protection for outdoor as well as indoor workers to deal with heat waves. Cool roofs program, so homes, workplaces, and public buildings. And here you get avoided costs from building cooling, so energy consumption is reduced. Very schematic, but nonetheless. Benefit cost ratio of heat stress adaptation measures in Indian cities. Shift working hours, urban greening, heat early warnings, cool roofs. So it's always important to look at COI, ROI, return on investments, and you can see they all have very high return on investment or benefit cost ratio. Urban greening, has other benefits, co-benefits like mental well-being, which is very important for productivity and functioning of the communities, etc., even reduced violence, etc. Investment needs per decade in the housing sector. I won't read all the numbers, but just want to give you a sense that they have done this going out to 2070. Uncertainties, but nonetheless, given the population growth, you can estimate these. Climate resilient and low carbon urban infrastructure investment needs in Indian cities by 2050 and 2070. So urban population growth, investment needs as a percentage of GDP at current standards, including climate resilient and low carbon investments, it goes up a little bit, as you can expect. Cumulative investment needs from 2021 in $1 trillion, so 2050 and 2070. Always important to think in terms of percentages of GDP, so that the numbers don't look overwhelming, as I said before. Okay, moderate urbanization scenario. This is conservative urbanization scenario. All the details are done. What are the key national and state initiatives on urban climate actions? National Action Plan for Climate Change and its 8 missions, so NAPCC, National Action Plan for Climate Change. There is also a National Adaptation Plan. India very much is a partner in Paris Agreement, signatory to Paris Agreement, and submits its NDCs and has met its renewable energy goals 5 years ahead already, and so on. So the NAPCC and its mission provide the overall framework for climate action. The National Action Plan for Climate Change and its 8 missions, NAPCC, National Solar Mission, National Mission on Enhanced Energy Efficiency, National Mission on Sustainable Habitat, National Water Mission, National Mission on Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystems, National Mission for Green India, and there are more that I'm going to skip and jump ahead to the various actions. Urban mobility and air quality, energy efficiency and renewables, water and waste management, green infra and biodiversity, integrated command and control centers, climate centers for cities. So there is a very strong smart cities initiative that's already going on, and many activities are under that. So smart cities have adopted solar energy systems, LED lighting, energy efficient building designs, greenfield projects, integrate sustainable energy frameworks, and so on and so forth. And there are numbers given in terms of how many cities are doing what. Okay, climate readiness in Indian cities. So here are some numbers. The City Readiness Report of June 2021, prepared by the C-Cube, is an initiative of the Government of India. The report tracks climate readiness among 126 of the Indian principal cities. The main findings are 10 cities have more than 15% of their electricity needs generated through renewable energy. 14 cities have more than 35% of their road network equipped with non-motorized transport infrastructure 35 cities have developed clean air action plans. 40 cities have instituted mechanisms for processing 100% of their collected wet waste. 67 cities have initiated water resource assessments. 101 cities have green buildings and are actively promoting the same. So I've skipped many here, but obviously it's an impressive list. 10-point city climate action plan then, we looked at it briefly. Here again, just reminding ourselves, cities need to assess risk and plan for climate actions. So conduct and continue updating local climate and disaster risk assessment. Each city needs to invest in disaster resilience and climate adaptation, develop impact-based multi-hazard and inclusive warning and response systems, ensure climate-sensitive new urban development, invest in risk reduction measures for floods and heat, prioritize the most vulnerable including the urban poor, facilitate the private sector's role in risk transfer and resilience. So acceptable and unacceptable risks will be written by the government or the private sector. Each city needs to invest in climate smart, climate resilient and green development. So plan and invest in compact and green city expansion and densification, mixed neighborhoods and so on, reduce the expansion quite a bit. Plan and invest in efficient, resilient and green municipal services. Invest in resilient and green public transport. This is very critical. Encourage resilient and green buildings and housing, especially for moving people from informal housing into, formal green housing. Key components of flood risk management strategies, of course, include flood prevention, exposure reduction, and disaster resilience. As we have discussed elsewhere, risk is a multiplier of hazard, which is extreme rain, let's say, and exposure, which we've talked about here, vulnerability, which basically depends on the kind of housing, income, education, etc., and exposure, vulnerability, hazard, and response. So here it is about improving the response so that overall risk is reduced. So disaster resilience then improves land risk information, reinforces evacuation systems, minimizes economic damages, promotes safer ways of living, improves support systems for affected local governments, and eliminates inundation promptly. So recovery is very important as well, right? National and state level recommendations, I won't read all of them, but they are split into launching flood and extreme heat resilience program for Indian cities. So improving robust and granular risk data, strengthening impact-based urban early warning and response, launch national and state integrated urban flood and water resilience. I guess I'll go ahead and read. Launch national and state extreme heat resilience program, support high risk and most vulnerable urban population. So there are lots of details in each rubric that I'm going to skip. Ensure resilient and efficient urban heat and municipal services, strengthen regulations, infrastructure standards and integrated planning for compact and resilient urban development, resilient, efficient and green municipal services, as we mentioned, resilient, efficient and green building and housing, resilient, efficient and green urban infrastructure and public transport. So we're repeating some of them, but it's okay. Strengthen municipal capacity for resilient urban development. And finally, develop funding and financing strategy implementation roadmap to achieve urban resilience. This is very critical. All the plans are worthless if they just sit on the shelf. Need implementation plans, sustained funding, so mainstreaming the projects and implementations into budgets and fiscal policies. So here, improve ULB's access to finance and funding for urban resilience and improve private sector engagement in urban resilience as well. Okay, this is kind of the example of matrix of recommendations. So you have national, states, policy and regulations, planning, implementation, and financing, which is very critical. And of course cities. So you remember we talked about cities, states and national, so we are going here in the reverse order. What are the conclusions? Indian cities have a significant opportunity to adapt to growing climate and disaster impacts and set the country on a path towards vibrant economic growth and prosperity. I've cut out the rest of the text. Flooding and extreme heat events are projected to increase significantly in Indian cities. And even if there's uncertainty in those projections, we need to plan anyways. This report delves into the most significant climate risks for Indian cities and identifies the urgent and most cost-effective actions that cities can take to improve their resilience to climate and disaster risks. A transformative and investment program is a transformative program and an investment plan is proposed in this report, which can support effective urban policies, institutional frameworks, and capacity improvement on one hand, and raise resources, including from private sector, on the other. So before closing, let's look at I always forget the acronyms because there are thousands of them in each such report. Taram. There are various agencies, ULB, UDD, SDMA, state and national. NDMA is National Disaster Management Agency, and SDMA is the state disaster management agency, and ULB is the urban local body. Okay, so that should kind of complete the story for now. So please follow up with the report if you are interested. It's a very nice report, so I'll stop here.